shift into our routines. And that's what we're going to be talking about today in terms of being able to help to facilitate our more readily and accessible capabilities of our intuition. Is that routine puts us into a fixed system, right? We replicate again and again and again the same thing, and that tends to establish a stronger connection to that left hemisphere. Now, when we interrupt that cycle, when we actually take a moment and do something differently and enter into this rather than ordinary day-to-day and routine, non-ordinary state of reality via ritual, that's when we actually have a greater capability to not just connect, not just to comprehend, but also to a certain degree command and control access to our intuition. Now, I know that seems like more of a masculine aspect, command and control. However, it's something that when it happens spontaneously, it's difficult to develop a greater degree of connection to it. And as we better connect to it, then what we're able to do is we're able to bring it out on command, to access it like a tool in a toolkit, or to be able to shift into that state of mind and being so that we're more able to share these gifts. Now, as we do that, then rituals are really key, because what happens when we enter into a non-ordinary state of reality, a non-ordinary state of mind, is that we shift into that right hemisphere. Now, ritual is definitely one way that I found that have worked for me. And the difference primarily between a ritual and a routine is something that is highly replicable, that happens without having to think about it, right? It's like driving 45 minutes back home and you pull into your car and you're like, oh, your garage, you're like, oh my gosh, how did I even get home, right? Our subconscious, we can delegate certain tasks to it without and complete it without actually having to think about it. Now, with a ritual, what happens is we press pause on that. We actually have to think about what we're doing. And that either requires us doing something differently, like instead of driving home on that same route 45 minutes to get back to your garage at home, you drive an hour and a half going different turns, ways you hadn't necessarily gone before. And because it's something new, right hemisphere, all of a sudden we need to be much more aware. And as we are much more aware, and as we're like immersed in this experience, then all of a sudden we're spending more time in that right hemisphere. So it can be something, those rituals, it can be something that interrupts and interferes by either creating a new passage or information that we're looking to process, and can also be something that just requires all of our attention. Now, with the rituals, they really help because it can be everything from breath work to movement. It can be expressive, it can be contemplative, it can be all these different things. Really a big, broad area of it. And it can also be something that is just much more creative, right? Shifting into playing music for fun, shifting into doing art, drawing, coloring, shifting into getting out into onto the land. Like one of my regular practices is being out on the land, because the land, even though we tend to see it as more or less being the same, when we really get into connection and communication with the Aina, with the land itself, we find that there are all of these subtle differences, and that every time that I go out onto the land, every day that I'm out here on our Aina, there's something new for me to behold. And it does take me to really quiet myself, to immerse in a very mindful practice of what is called kilo in Hawaiian. And that's just mindful observation of our natural surroundings. So as we do that, we shift over to the right hand side, right? We spend by and large majority of our day on our left, within our left hemisphere, working within fixed systems, kind of just recreating things of everyday life. Now, as we shift, and this is important because not just for our intuitive talents to be able to access it more, although that's what we're going to be focusing upon this week, our genius is usually something that is inconsistent with the life we have created. The lifestyle of our genius and the lifestyle of our everyday life often are not necessarily consistent with each other. And so, as we want to really shift into moving into our sacred work, our great work, then part of it is being able to see and to perceive ourselves differently. And so, as we look at then ritual, that's going to be a big part of it. As we look at ritual and being able to make this a part of our everyday life, for me, I personally feel that I go through different rituals 3 times a day. The morning, usually about mid-afternoon, and then in the evening or before I go to sleep. And so it really helps because we are very much like a musical instrument, right? There very much is like this electrotonal aspect of ourself, in that we talk about vibration, in that we talk about the level of vibration that we're at has an effect upon our nervous system. And that neurological connectivity is something that when we're tuning ourselves to the right frequency, to the right note, all of a sudden we're just more effective. And what that looks like is just, picking up a guitar, right? I pick up a guitar and I tune it, and I have everything just perfectly tuned. I start to play, I start to play, I start to play. Just by the sheer usage of my guitar, it's going to become flat because I'm, strumming nylon or steel strings, and eventually it will get a little flat. And if I continue to play without checking in, then what happens is I can be playing flat for like months. And this is relevant because I have, and not even know it until I come together with others or I take a moment to tune. And as I take a moment to tune, I come to realize how out of tune I had been. Now, put differently, in this case, as we talk about our mind, we can spend so much time in our conscious mind, so much time in that left hemisphere, that we have not noticed how out of tune our mind has become. And so when we take that time with the ritual, for example, we take time to attune our mind to that frequency of the soul, our super conscious mind. And in doing so, what's great about that, and in doing so as a regular practice, right, going through our own process, then what we're really able to do is we're able to shift the very way that we perceive ourselves. And as we shift the very way that we perceive ourselves, we're better able to open up more of us, who we truly are. And so where that comes into play, specifically now coming back full circle to our intuitive talents, is that this week we're really going to be looking at that in terms of a personal practice. And it's going to be different because what works for a kinesthetic is not necessarily going to be as applicable for an empath. What works for an empath is not going to be as applicable for what works for a psychic. And what works for a psychic is not going to be as applicable for what works for an energetic. And in being able to look at all of these aspects for ourselves, and the primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary line of our intuitive talents, then allows us to do more for then ultimately our genius. Now, what that really looks like then to direct things in terms of where we're going to be going with this week is really going to be looking at how is it that with my intuitive talents, for myself, for example, as an energetic kinesthetic hybrid, where are the opportunities for me to be able to not just shift into that state of mind that allows me to better access and connect to my intuitive talents? How then can I also bring that forth and express it in a way that is real, meaningful, and safe for all? And so that's what we're really going to be jumping into this week. And so I invite you to check us out in terms of our posts for the course of this week. We're going to have a lot more in terms of video content, but then also going a little bit deeper in terms of some of the mechanics of the intuitive talents, and then how that really relates to our personal genius, and where that really goes from here in terms of our whole concept of quantum wizardry. Okay, that's it for now. Love and aloha to you all. Take care of each other, and ahui ho.